Good afternoon and welcome to Stock Market Today, sponsored by Interactive Brokers. It's September 9th, Monday, and we're here live from the Investors Business Daily Studios in Los Angeles. There's a lot to unpack today, so let's get right to it. We're going to start with Alteryx and Lattice Semiconductor. We're also going to get through OLED, Universal Display, and Apple Computer to end the day. But first, let's take a look at the major market indexes. We had a lot of what looked like flat action today, but when you kind of unpack it, it was really rough. So this is Justin Nielsen along with Ed Carson. And Ed, what did you make of today's action?
Well, it is hard to say because if you look at the major indexes, they weren't moving that much. I mean, Nasdaq actually moved the most. It reversed down. It actually just undercut its 50-day line for a moment before pairing most of its losses. But you saw some really heavy selling in software groups. I mean, there's been some selling in recent weeks, but that really intensified today. A lot of top stocks breaking through support or breaking through below consolidations. I mean, there were some, on the positive side, there was chip stocks, which have been doing well, some builders doing well, but also some beaten down names, machinery, energy, the Russell 2000.
Yeah, the Russell 2000 was up over 1%.
Yeah.
And, so it kind of, again, it looked kind of flat and like not much was happening on the surface of the S&P 500 on the Nasdaq, but it was almost like there was a bubbling underneath.
Yeah, a lot of possible rotation going on.
Mm-hmm. Now, let's go ahead and get into some names. So, first of all, Alteryx. Now, this is a name that looked like everything was fine if you would had looked at it last week, but then all of a sudden things really looked very different today, as it did with a lot of software stocks.
Yeah, I mean, one thing is that sometimes a stock will hold up well, even though the market or the sector is going against it, and then suddenly break. I mean, a lot of software stocks have been coming under pressure. Alteryx really hadn't. I mean, it actually hit a record high intraday on Friday, but then today it had a double-digit loss, falling through its 50-day line, first time in 3 months. I mean, really, it's almost like shooting fish in a barrel. If it was a software stock that's done anything in 2019, it was hammered today. It's just a question of how much. So, Zscaler earnings are coming up. That'll be interesting tomorrow because that was one of the big winners. But it was a really tough day for software.
Yeah, and so Alteryx ended up down 15%, more than 15%, and as you mentioned, plunging through the 50-day moving average. Just to kind of recap what happened in the indexes. Sorry, my computer went down a little bit on that at the beginning here, but S&P 500 was flat. Nasdaq Composite was down just 0.2%, and as we mentioned, the Russell 2000 was the big winner today, 1.3%, but that hasn't really been leading for most of the year. That's been kind of the one that's been rough. Let's go ahead and move on to Universal Display, OLED. That was another one that was looking pretty okay last week. A nice breakout, but then kind of reversed today.
Yeah, we saw a number of stocks that had broken out. So it wasn't just software. It seems like a lot of leading stocks came under pressure. Universal Display, which as its ticker suggests, OLED, it makes this, technology and some components for those OLED displays you see on smartphones and a lot of TVs today. So that had been doing really well, but came under a lot of pressure. I mean, just on a related note, Visa and MasterCard, some of those payment stocks that had broken out last week really hit hard today. So it's just not just a signal. That's a bad sign.
Yeah. So again, if you were looking at the flat action in the indexes, you might have been surprised at what happened to your portfolio in this case. Now, there wasn't just complete utter destruction out there. Lattice Semiconductor was trying to break out today, and again, a lot of chip names were looking pretty decent. So what happened with Lattice Semiconductor? Well,
it's been setting up for a while. Actually, arguably it sort of broken out a couple of months ago when it had an earnings gap up, and after that it consolidated very nicely even during August. And so now it tried to break out. It did clear the 21 buy point. I think it came just below that at the close, but it was right around there. So we'll see if it can have a second day sort of follow through and break out. A lot of other stocks are doing well. ASML, LRCX broke out last week. Applied Materials is closing on a buy point. Broadcom has earnings later this week. That's a little further off, but it's doing okay. So, I mean, it is a little bit, you got to be a little bit careful because, China trade optimism. I mean, if that turns, chip stocks are likely to be hit more in that situation. Chip stocks are already fairly volatile. So if you buy a chip stock in this market, I mean, you might see some nice gains, but be ready for some big losses too.
Okay, now speaking of the China trade, Apple, so they've got their event coming up this week. A lot of eyes are on that, the new iPhones. But this is also setting up technically on a chart pattern as well.
Yeah, I mean, Apple, their expectations are fairly low for the iPhones. They're going to come out with 3 new models, and they're going to come out with at least 1 new Apple Watch model. But it's supposed to be incremental changes, maybe not something that's really going to drive a lot of sales. But then on the flip side of that also suggests that there won't be a lot of disappointment for the stock, perhaps.
Low expectations,
low
right?
expectations, but yes, it's setting up nicely. The relative strength line is getting close to a consolidation high. That would be sort of that bluish line down below. It's getting near that. I mean, the downside is that on a longer-term basis, the relative strength line has been sort of flat for almost 7 years, give or take. So it hasn't really outperformed. Profits have fallen in the last 2 quarters. They're supposed to fall this quarter, though. Any kind of beat, and Apple would presumably get some kind of gain. But that is an issue there, is that there's not really a lot of growth. It's not clear what's going to be a huge driver that really moves the needle. I mean, service growth is there and some other things, but with iPhone sales falling, that's a potential downside for the stock.
Right. Okay, that'll go ahead and do it for us today. We'll see what the market has in store for us tomorrow if this continues, or if this is something more serious or just a little blip. But in the meantime, we have a few events that are coming up. If you would like to go ahead and register for an ETF webinar that we have, that's going to be next week on Tuesday. Mike Webster and I will be partaking in that and leading that. That is at investors.com/webinar. And also don't forget, Allie is in New York, and she's doing another investing strategies at the Nasdaq. So to find that, you can go to investors.com/investing strategies to get the latest from the experts that she's interviewing at the Nasdaq. And also don't forget to follow us on social media. We are on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and on Twitter. Thank you very much for watching us today, and we'll see you right back here tomorrow.